I walked by room 314 this morning, and I said, why are all the chairs out here? Are they doing the floors? Are they all out in the hallway? Well, as it turns out, yes, this is where we're going to have Arthur's ceremony. But man, we've run out of room already. I shouldn't be surprised, though. You know, as I look out at the room, I was just saying to Sue Caron Esposito that you know, a group like this doesn't get together. There's something very special about it. And as as is, you know, sort of the protocol for events, you know, especially when there's, you know, elected officials and former elected officials and former, you know, senior officials and current senior officials in city government, you go around and do the acknowledgments. There are just too many of you to do that. Justice, we'll be here all day. And I think that is, that's a real testament to our honoree. So I will keep it with family today, but know that the family, most importantly, you know, Jim and Sue and Margarita and all the grandchildren fully appreciate just what a special occasion this is, and just how amazing it is that there's such an outpouring of affection for Arthur. But just in the way of recognizing family, Margarita is here. We're so pleased that you are here with us today. And Jim and Sue are here with their families, Matt and Martha, and all the grandchildren are here. And we're going to hear from one of them. We're going to hear from Ben, who's back in town all the way from Stanford University. This is how he's spending his spring break. This is much better than Fort Lauderdale. There's no better way to do it. So without any further ado, I know we're in a fairly confined space, and there are lots of folks who want to say something about Arthur, and so I'll kick it off with just a couple of observations. I'm so pleased to be here today because, you know, we don't, and we have so many other mayors in the room. I do want to acknowledge the mayors, of course, because Arthur worked for just about every single one since Charles Ashley, I think. But you know, so you know, Mayor Lang is here, Mayor Kalitz is here, Mayor Bullard is here, Rosemary is here. Way back there. Mayor Tierney is here. Mayor Markey is here, and having everybody here, and of course. Arthur also worked for Brian Lawler and Eddie Harrington and George Rogers, and it's just such an amazing run. But yeah, I said Kalitz. Yeah, I did. I wouldn't forget him. He's Polish like me. I would never forget him. But you know, it's you know, for all of us, I would say, you know. There are lots of reasons why we wanted Arthur on the team, and you know, not the least of which, just you know, for the record, is that Arthur was just this eminently capable attorney. I mean, he was really, really skillful. He's very valuable. He had just this encyclopedic knowledge of not only the city and its history, but also of municipal law, of labor law in particular. And he was a highly skilled negotiator. I mean, he could have done the North Korea deal on behalf of the United States much more skillfully than the current occupant of the White House. But Arthur combined not only those skills, negotiating skills, but he was also somebody who just had a tremendous political acumen, someone who just sort of understood how the pieces fit together. He understood municipal finance. He understood how it all fit, and could think very clearly in a strategic way. That for me, and I know it's true for every mayor that's been here in City Hall over the last 50 years, was hugely, hugely valuable. And you know, a big part of what we do as mayors is we spend a lot of time thinking about money. And we think about money because it is, frankly, a solemn trust to be spending people's hard-earned livings on matters of collective interest. But it's in watching every last penny and making sure that it's spent consistently with the city's goals. You need to have someone who can, you know, navigate the way. And when it comes to labor contracts, when it comes to, you know, any other manner of things on which we spend a great deal of money, and for where decisions have implications not just 5 years out, but 20 years out. You need that kind of guidance, and Arthur was just indispensable in that way. But you all know that, and you all know, too, that honestly, I just love the guy. I just loved having him around, and it's just an amazing. I mean, I don't want to steal Jim's thunder, but you just told me just such a perfect story. If I co-opt it for you, but it's the same thing I've heard a number of times in the last couple of days as this event is approached, which is, you know, you were in the elevator, and it must have been Lane or Sue who said, hey, or Joanne, probably Joanne, who brought you up to the third floor and said, you know, I asked you whether you were going to the Arthur Caron event. You said yes, and didn't reveal who you are, which was interesting. You were probably setting her up, and you set her up perfectly, because she said, "What a great guy!" He's just he's such a great guy, and that's the first thing that comes off of everybody's lips when they hear the name Arthur Caron. And you know, I can't remember a single time when I had a meeting with him that didn't at some point wind up in a belly laugh, right? You just sort of sit there and you talk through serious issues with him, but he's always adding in sort of, you know, the color, the history, you know, the personalities, the cast of characters that made, you know, any given set of issues sort of unique. And so it was just sort of fun being around the guy. He always had a motor, you know, right up until the end. He really, I'm trying to think. So I'm glad the fire union is here. I don't know if anybody from the police union is here. Right, so you'll appreciate this. So right up to the last day, he wanted not only to be, you know, filling out affidavits. I think Jane had asked him to fill out an affidavit as part of a grievance. He actually said, "Bring everybody over to Alden Court to my bedside. I want to testify." So that happened. That really happened in the last year. He also, this is something, I hope I'm not, you know, maybe this is the mayor's prerogative to steal everybody's thunder ahead of beyond me, but I know Ben, about a year and a half ago or so, we attended a meeting with the Environmental Protection Agency and on wastewater issues, which, you know, every mayor in the city in the last 40 years has been dealing with them. And they always deal with, you know, figures that have like 9 zeros after them and are always very complex. But he wanted to be there, and he had been convalescing for a while. But he wanted to show up because he more than anything else, I'll say about Arthur, is that he owned it. He cared. He just cared so much at a very personal level. So as much of a great guy as he was, as talented as he was, he at his core, he just loved the city, and that's just indispensable for us. And we are the great beneficiaries of you know, his leadership, his devotion to the place, and we're forever grateful. And when we name things in people's honor, big public things like you know, a library, a law library, a building, whatever it is, it's by a single standard, really, when you get down to it. Whether the person is a national figure or a municipal figure, it's when you get right down to it, it's when properly applied, the standard is, when properly defined, the standard is this somebody we want kids in the future to emulate, right? Is that person worthy of everyone's emulation? And in the case of Arthur Caron, yeah, I couldn't say enough about him. He's somebody that we want to be more like all the time. And so he's a great friend, and I'm so glad that, frankly, the family is getting to see just how widespread and universally felt the affection for Arthur was and is. So with all that, I thank all of you for being here today. We have a short speaking program, and I wanted to ask Linda Moran, our city council president, who knew Arthur for an awfully long time, to come on up and say a few words on behalf of the council. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Elegantly said about a man that everybody in this room knows, loves, and respects. My family was part of the law community in New Bedford since 1950, and Arthur is a long-term practicing attorney in the city. And back in the 50s and 60s, there weren't big law firms. There were individual lawyers who worked together side by side for the betterment of their clients. So I've known Arthur for a lot longer than the 14 years that I've served here on the City Council. But every single one of us who has served on the New Bedford City Council since Arthur joined the city in 1969 has absolutely great respect for that man. He was an absolute gentleman. He cared about both sides of an issue. He oftentimes came to us, to me, I'll speak about myself, but I know I've heard this from Councilor Alves and I've heard this from Councilor Garatowski as well, both who are here, along with Brad Markey, who currently serves, and Councilor Gonzalez, that he would come to us sometimes and give us the other side of the story, even though he worked for whatever mayor that was, because he wanted us to make an informed decision and he wanted us to make the right decision. So he cared about what people were doing and how they were representing the city, and he cared about law. He was someone that people looked up to. He mentored an awful lot of people in the city. Many people in the city are where they are because of Arthur's mentorship and his willingness to coach people and to care about people. Arthur Caron was a great man. His family was lucky to have him, and we were very lucky to have him, to be sharing with him. It's a loss for our city. We appreciate that we're going to forever have him with us by having his picture in the law library dedicated to him, and I know that all of you would join me in thanking him for what he did for the city of New Bedford.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Linda. So I did want to add one little thing. You know, Arthur, among the negotiating advantages that Arthur in his later career was able to offer the city was the excuse that he was in Florida, right? So the likes of Jimmy Allen, Billy Cabral, and Stevie Pexo, they're all here. They all heard from me at some point. Yeah, we can't go back to the table because Arthur's in Florida, and so that would put it on pause for like, what, 4 months or 5 months, which is perfect. We can't get away with that anymore. Only Arthur could offer that excuse because he knew, Billy in particular since he was a kid. I think that your presence today says volumes about, the way that Arthur conducted himself. So I just appreciate you guys being here. So Arthur made a huge impact, obviously, in the solicitor's office with many folks who've worked in the solicitor's office over the years and city solicitors, past and present. And I wanted to call up our current city solicitor, Michaela McDermott, to say a few words about Arthur.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, everybody. We currently have about 14 employees in the city solicitor's office, and we added up all of the years collectively that we worked with Arthur, and it came to 164. Jane Medeiros-Friedman and Lisa Presby, who worked with him very, very closely, account for about 55 of those years, but still the balance of it shows you what a tremendous contribution he made to the current city solicitor's office. He was a mentor to each and every one of us. We learned not just about the black letter law, but how to approach things practically. And as the mayor mentioned, he had a tremendous sense of humor. So usually we'd go to him with a question and would analyze the law, talk about what situation worked for the city, learn about why things are the way they are in New Bedford, but typically would end, with a big laugh. So we miss him tremendously in the office, and often, wish we could seek his counsel, but we think, what would Arthur do all the time? So I wanted his family to know that we remember him all the time, every day. We look at his opinions, and we think about how he would have approached things. And when we have those situations, I could say probably once a week, we have a situation where we say, you can't make this stuff up. We think he would have enjoyed that. We have a lot of humor. So because he meant so much to us, I just want to thank everybody for the dedication. Thank you to the mayor and to the city council for agreeing to dedicate the library to him. Thank you to Angela and Natho for, I think, coming up with the idea and working so hard for this celebration. And thank you to the Caron family for, I think, commissioning what I'm sure is a beautiful portrait of Arthur. I think it'll be, seeing him every day will remind us of him and will remind us to practice law with diligence and integrity and to enjoy ourselves while we do so. Thank you.
Before I call up Jim on behalf of the family, I did want to give a shout out to the painter herself, Deb Macy, who's with her granddaughter right now. See, I'm talking about you, Deb. No, I have to give you still have your portrait of me in your house somewhere, so you can adulterate it at some point if I don't give you full credit. But no, I'm sure it's, you have such a wonderful track record. I'm sure it's going to be no surprise that it's a splendid representation of Arthur. Again, I mean, Arthur above all else was a family man. And I know he was extraordinarily proud of the achievements of his children, which are extraordinary, as well as his grandchildren. And I can't do it justice, so I'm going to obviously turn it over to Jim at this point to say a few words on behalf of the Caron family. Jim.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great. Wow. So, first of all, let me say thank you very much to all of you. I can't tell you how much this means, to myself, my sister, my mother, and our entire family, and just to have my father's grandchildren be able to see this and to actually hear this and see a room filled with people who loved him and worked so closely with him and really made up a lot of his life, and it's absolutely spectacular. I can't tell you how much it means to us. Ben, who's going to come up right now, he's going to say a few words, and I'm going to follow. But Ben, why don't you come on up and say a few things. But again, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. No, I would also like to echo my uncle's words of thanks. This is an incredible event just to see all these people that my grandfather had worked with, and played a part in their lives. And I knew that saying any sort of words at an event like this would be tough, because I only have my perspective on my grandfather, and whether it be fly fishing with him in Montana, or when he took me to many events in City Hall, whether it be some sort of negotiations or, like the mayor had mentioned, the EPA negotiations as well. But I only have one perspective on my grandfather. I knew that each one of you has some sort of memory of him that I can't possibly capture within a few words. But I can just say, I think some things that everyone here can acknowledge is true. I mean, my grandfather, he cared so much about this wonderful city. He cared about the law. I mean, he worked in D.C. but decided to come back home, raise a family, and continue his legacy of service right here in the city of New Bedford. And even through the end, he cared so much about this city. As all of you, I think, know, he couldn't even last, I'm sure, a week into retirement before he came back to City Hall and returned to serve. It shocks me that, 70, 80 years old, and he's still working for the city. That's how much, like you said, he really did have a motor. It just would never stop. Every day I would see him, whether it be over summer break or on some other break, he'd be looking through some papers, remembering some deal, or even recalling to me a crazy meeting he had just had. My grandfather just could not abandon his passion, how much he cared for public service and the law. And so I just hope that this library serves as an important resource, but more importantly as an inspiration of the importance of public service and the personal dedication one can have. The same way my grandfather served as an inspiration for me, for my family, and for every single person, as you can see here, that he had ever worked with. So thank you. Thank you very much for making this event possible, for the dedication, for the painting, and God bless. Thank you.
So, again, thank you very much. My mother had reminded me to say that, home was home, but City Hall was always viewed by my father as his second home. And I remember coming here because he'd always come in on Saturdays, and I'd like to play in the elevator and just run around and look at all the oil paintings, which are still here, which are beautiful. This was really, this is a place when I drive by it, this is exactly what I think about. This is family. This is really family, and many of you, make up that family, and certainly make up the history. And I'm always very appreciative when, people pull me aside. Ron LaBelle, was talking to me about, a few things earlier on, and, just some fun stories. But that, these are things that really made up his, his whole life. And it's true, he really loved the city. And he always had a very strong desire to leave things better than the way he found them. And, in fact, I'll even be honest with you, I don't even know if you had to pay him for the last 10 years. He would have probably just maybe I shouldn't say it, but, it's okay. I mean, it was really, truly an honor for him. And and a lot of the things that people said, I wrote down a couple of notes here, and I said, what could I say to, emphasize the way he felt about things. And to be very honest, everybody said exactly what's on this piece of paper that I'm looking at. It's pretty much, it's 100% correct. I mean, he really treated people with fairness and mutual respect. And, when times got tough, people generally wanted to know what Arthur thought. And I was witness to that, even as, the phone would ring late at night and somebody would need to have some deep conversation, which I couldn't understand, but I knew it was important, and I knew, what was going on was meaningful and it had impact. So it was always something that I looked up to and I always sort of admired. One of the best compliments, I know we have some, I was speaking to the leader of the teachers union, and I know we have fire, police, and everybody here. I mean, these people should hate him, right? Billy and I, we played hockey together for, my God, ever since I was a kid, and I remember him calling me up one day and said, "Oh, by the way, do you know who I'm talking to with the fire department now? We have Billy Cabral on the other side of the table with me." I'm like, "Oh, good luck." But the reality is that absolutely the best compliments that I get are the people who he sat across the table from that come up to me and say, "God, I negotiated with him, but afterwards, at the end of the day, we'd go out and get a beer and we'd just talk about things, and we just, and it would be great. And sometimes even in the middle of the day, he'd go out and grab a beer. And that's okay. It was a different time. But it's all very, very good. But the point is that the debates, the negotiations, it was never personal with him, right? It was, everybody was trying to get to a job. And as was discussed, one of the things that he told me about, meetings, I'd say, what do you do? They would do these all-night meetings sometimes where you can't get out of the room until an agreement was made, and they would go around the clock. And he said, the hardest thing to do, and once people realize it, it becomes a lot easier, is that when you have a negotiation with somebody, both sides have to know that there has to be a compromise. And once both sides recognize that and they're willing to give, that's when you actually start to, make some traction. But absolutely understanding the other person's point of view is exactly what he said. You really have to understand from the other guy's shoes, and you really have to see what their point is, and recognize that you're not going to get everything you want. But and this is something I think in many cases, instead of people coming together in negotiations and having be arch enemies and bitter rivals and forever. I think that's a really good example. If there's any one example I could think about today that would be an extremely great example for us all to follow and for us all to practice, is understand the other person's point of view and see it the way that they're seeing it, and that debates and negotiations never became very, very personal. So that's why I always, it's a real testament to hear people come up to me and just say, we debated with each other and it was a tough negotiation, but they're still friends, and many of them are in this room, and I think that's fantastic. And look, if you knew him, you knew that he was very agreeable by nature, right? He wanted people just to kind of get together. Let's figure this thing out and let's come up with a solution. And I know he was always very honest. And I know sometimes he had to have an honest discussion with the mayor and say, look, I think this is where we need to go with this. And other times it was, with whoever he was negotiating against. But I think, for the most part, what made it successful for him was that there was just a lot of mutual respect. And that everybody knew that the person that they were dealing with wasn't a bad guy, wasn't somebody who was just out to get them and didn't really care. And it was actually somebody who did care. And we're all trying to do, we're all trying to do our job. So I think, for City Hall, again, as my mother said, his second home, for a portrait to be in the law library, he's still watching over the place. And I think, if nothing else, if he were here right now, he would be obviously, he'd be very appreciative of what everybody said, but I think he would probably return the compliment. And I think it was, James Joyce that wrote, when he wrote about Ulysses, and he said, I'm the sum of all I've met. And I think what he would do is he would turn around and say, look, thank you very much for all these kind words, but what you have to know is that all of you enabled this. They enabled my father to interact with you in a certain way and have it. So it's not just, it really just isn't about him. It's really about all of you. And that's really when I think about New Bedford and I think about all of the struggles that the city has gone through since, late 60s, early 70s, that's where my memories start. It certainly is a very great neighborhood. It's a great family feeling, and just to have everybody together from either side of the table come together and just do this, it's just such an amazing tribute to him, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I know my family, my mother, my children, my niece and nephew, my sister, Suzanne, just for us to really be able to see this and have you all spend, take time out of your week to do this, it's such a great honor. So, with that, I just want to say thank you very much, and I absolutely salute every single one of you. This was absolutely fantastic. I really couldn't have asked for anything more. So thank you very much, and God bless everybody. Thank you. Do you want to help me unveil this? Do you want to scooch around? Do you want to go over? Okay, so my sister and I are going to try to unveil this thing.